All right. Hey everybody, how you guys doing tonight?
Yeah.
It's always great, for me to, as a kid from Brooklyn to go out and come to London, and one of the greatest cities in the world. I'm sure you guys all know the famous line that when one tires of London, one tires of life, right? We have a group of English scholars here, so I guess you know who said that.
No?
Wow, that's sad. That's Samuel Johnson.
All right.
Okay, all right. Well, that's my mission in life. I go out and educate the masses. But anyhow, Samuel Johnson's a wise man, and I think there's a lot to be said for that. And any of the great cities in the world, right? New York, London, Paris. I think that's true. Anyhow, this is how to be an impassioned valuer. A seminar I've given any number of times in the United States in various towns and cities. I don't think I've given it overseas yet. I think this is the first time. So thank you, Razi and the Ayn Rand Center for bringing me in here to do this. This is very much an applied, hands-on seminar. This is not theory. We'll do a very little bit of theory on the nature of values, but mostly this is about forming and pursuing personal values. Let me see by a show of hands. I assume everybody here has read some of Ayn Rand's books. Am I right? The Fountainhead, Atlas Shrugged, The Virtue of Selfishness. All right. Elaine, have you read any of Ayn Rand's books?
I haven't.
Okay. Well, welcome. Then, but you know who she is, right?
Yeah, no.
Okay.
I've read about her.
Okay. All right. Well, for somebody who's seeking a theoretical understanding of Ayn Rand, this isn't the seminar for that. This is, like I said, this is hands-on, applied. But for theory, it's easy enough to get to.
They're all free.
It's easy enough to get an understanding of objectivism by reading Atlas Shrugged. So, I envy you. You have the opportunity to read Ayn Rand's novels for the first time. It's interesting that Ayn Rand has become more famous, I think, as a philosopher than as a novelist. And even amongst a lot of objectivists, their interest is more in philosophy than in literature. And yet Ayn Rand herself was first, foremost, and always a novelist. She set out to be a novelist and developed her philosophy because she in her novel she wanted to project the ideal man, the ideal human being, and in order to do that, she needed to study philosophy, have an understanding of human nature, what kind of world we live in, and how human beings gain knowledge. The reason I bring up the novelist part is there's a lot of people in philosophy, both academic philosophy and I think sadly amongst objectivists, emotionally they're a little stiff. They're not like really vital, passionate, passionately alive people. And I want to use Ayn Rand's characters, as examples to start out with, of valuers, and then go into the discussion of values, and then how do we get them. So I'm going to start with my all-time favorite book of every, and I've been a bookworm since I was a little kid. But my all-time favorite book, fiction, non-fiction, by any author, is The Fountainhead. That is my, my Bible. I guess it's the Old Testament, right? Atlas Shrugged is the New Testament. But there's this for those of you, Howard Roark, of course, an architect, and there's that great scene when the Enright House is completed. And what a struggle it's been for Roark, who's got revolutionary ideas in the field of architecture. What a struggle it's been for him to get commissions and everything. And this beautiful building he designed is completed, and he's standing on the it's right on the East River in New York City, and he's standing at the parapet overlooking the river, and he's looking up at his building, and a photographer. You guys remember this scene in The Fountain? Hey.
Hello.
All right. Look who's here.
Get the final one.
And a photographer snaps a photo of Roark, a young photographer, because it was the expression of pure ecstatic joy that he had never or at very most rarely seen in his life, and the experience of passionate joy that Rourke has here, and as his baby has been completed, is and this comes up throughout Ayn Rand's novels with her heroes and heroines, and the thing that always strikes me here, is the passion. The what the French call, is it okay to quote the French in England?
No.
Be careful.
He's Greek, he's not.
I'm French.
Say anything.
All right,
leaving
good.
the union, so it's okay.
Yeah, joie de vivre. It's a great expression that the French have, right? The joy of living, and you see it over and over again in Rourke's. I mean, and not just in Rourke, but in Ayn Rand's characters more broadly. And so I could go through. I could enumerate any number of examples from Rand's fiction, but I think one is enough here. And the question is, the question that I always was interested in, from the time I was a teenager and read Ayn Rand's books for the first time, is how do I get? You look at it very selfishly, right? Ayn Rand's an egoist. We live for our own well-being and our own happiness. How can I live with this kind of joie de vivre? What do I do to live with this kind of passion? And let me tell you something, a personal anecdote first, because I only met Ayn Rand very briefly twice, in my life. Unlike Leonard Peikoff, who was my teacher, who was Ayn Rand's student for 30 years. But there was one that was 1980 maybe. I was a young graduate student. And Ayn Rand died shortly, a year or two after that, in March of 1982, 1980 or 81. She always often lectured at Fort Hall Forum in Boston, and she was sitting down. She was elderly, and she at that time she was writing the screenplay for an Atlas Shrugged film. Interestingly, she wanted Clint Eastwood to play the main character in the novel. I won't mention the main character's name for those of you who haven't read the book yet. So I was just, she was just talking to some of her fans, and I asked her if she wanted a glass of water. She said, yes, please. And I'd always heard or read from people who knew her about her capacity for radiant joy, but I didn't know her personally. And I brought her a glass of water, and I gave it to her. I mean, she lit up like a jack-o'-lantern, So like I'd just given her $5 million or something. She just the smile that she gave me, thank you. And it was just, I'll never forget, I've never in my life experienced such, I think the expression was radiant joy, from and over a simple thing like a glass of water. And you can see in her eyes, those genius eyes, those penetrating eyes, you can see the intelligence just bursting out of it, which I have great admiration for, as Ayn Rand established in Atlas Shrugged. The mind is mankind's instrument of survival, but it was the joie de vivre that captivated me. I mean, that's what really intrigued me. She's a genius, I'm not, but can I live with that kind of of joyfulness? That to me was the question. That's like the genesis for this seminar. Years later, I had a PhD in philosophy, and I was becoming known as a lecturer and writer and everything. And so this is really my own selfish interest here. How do we live with this kind of passion? So here's what I want to do. I think central to this kind of joyfulness, or joyousness, is what Ayn Rand calls values. And that's so I want to do two things here. I want to briefly chew, as in Leonard Peikoff's metaphor, chew the concept of values, and then go into the discussion of forming, hierarchizing, or putting them in a hierarchy, and then pursuing values. So let's start off with a brief discussion of what values are. I think most of you probably know this, so this is reviewed. Nevertheless, it's a good place to start. Ayn Rand defines values as that which one acts to gain and or keep. Everybody remembers this definition. Values are that which one acts to gain and or keep. The key term in that definition, obviously, well, maybe it's not nothing in philosophy is obvious. The key term in that definition is what? Values are that which one acts to gain and or keep. Andrew? Acts, absolutely. Values are always the object of an action. That this is what distinguishes them from a dream or a wish or a fantasy. Values are that which are sufficiently, my values or your values or anybody's values are that which are sufficiently important to me to impel me to goal-directed action. Yeah, that's what's different from a fantasy. I mean, you know, if I'm thinking, oh, if only I had $5 million, you know, what I could do with my life if I had $5 million. But all I do in action is sit around on the beach, you know, at Boca, sip pina coladas and watch the girls go by. If that's all I do in action, this is like you know, Eamon's life. You know, if that's all I do in action, you know, is that kind of wealth of value to me? No.
Oh, I guess.
Come on. Hey, Isaac Newton. No, that's not a value. At that point, it's just a fantasy. What would I have to do to transform it to a value? Well, first thing I'd have to do would be get up off my rear end and get a job, right? Start making some money, and then work out a budget so I could save some of the money from that job, and then get a second job, maybe, and save all of that money. And then after a few years, I build up a nest egg, I invest it, and I start tracking the investments, you know, to make sure that they, you know, that they grow. And I think at that point we could say, wealth is a value to this person. You can see the steps that this person's taken to create wealth in, you know, in his or her life. So the values are I think, always. And always and everywhere, value is that which motivates. It's sufficiently important to me to impel me to goal-directed action. And you know, you can put this simply: a value to me is that which I consider valuable, right? That which I consider important, that which I consider worthy, and you know, nowhere. They say actions speak louder than words, and nowhere is that, you know, more accurate than in ethics. You could tell anybody's values, starting with your own, and then radiating out to everybody in your purview. You could identify anybody's values by what they go after in action. Not primarily. Food is a value, without a doubt. Hey, Laura. No, it's okay. We like you, and especially since you bring us food, you know, we like you even more. Actions speak louder than words, right? People can talk all they want. It's what they do. That, you know, I know how many people have told me over the years, I'm a writer. I'm gonna be a writer, and I say, oh, really? Great. What have you written? You know, well, you know, nothing.
Burger? Where the burger, guys? Nobody? Nobody ordered a burger?
Kelly ordered it.
No, I'm alright.
You could have it, Laura.
Burger 30, table 70. I don't know.
Wasn't me. When I come to the pubs, I eat pub food.
Table 17.
Yeah.
Lara?
Is he go, Stavi?
And what is that? That's not a dirty paper?
This is
That's what happened. I went to see Lara Croft on Sunday.
is this.
Is this one?
Yeah.
Fine. We're in Stockholm.
But
Wasn't that good?
Is that yours? Oh, I'm really sorry. I think I had it shit.
We like mayonnaise mustard or something else.
Good.
Yeah.
Sí, what was something? All right.
We are sorry for that.
Anyhow, so when I say talk is cheap, right? So I know any number of people who tell me that they're writers, and I say, oh, that's great, really, what have you written? And they say, well, nothing, you know, or they're going to be writers one day, except that, you know, the one day seems to never, you know, sadly seems never to arrive. So you know, it's about action. So that's one important point about values. Now of course, at the deeper philosophic level, you know, Rand points out values for any species are those things which sustain and enhance the life of that organism. Values are that which sustain, you know, or enhance the life of an organism. So, you know, any living being, you look at its factual nature, you know, and the nature of the organism determines what will support its life versus what will harm its life. You know, so a plant, for example, has to dig its roots into the soil to gain chemical nutrients to support its life. It's got to grow its leaves up toward the sun to gain the sunlight, you know, and so on. Lions got to hunt. They're carnivores by nature. They need meat. They're not gonna survive on a vegetarian diet. You know, if the lion's hungry enough, it might eat. You know, if I tell the lionesses, the girls do the work, right? The girls do the hunting. You know, so they're not vultures. Anyhow, the girls do the hunting. If I go to the lionesses and say, "You see that zebra over there?" You know, and she says, "Yeah." I says, "Well, you know, that zebra has rights. You can't eat it. You know, I'm an animal rights activist. You can't eat the zebra. But here, I have a nice zucchini salad for you, and you know, instead." Laura would appreciate this, right? She's Italian. You know, if the lioness could speak, and if under the circumstances it uttered anything printable, she might say to me, "Dr. Bernstein," you know, because she wants to be respectful, obviously. You know, I'm a lion. If I'm sufficiently hungry, I might eat that zucchini salad of yours, but I can't digest it. I can't get any sustenance from a vegetative diet. I'm not an omnivore or an herbivore. I'm a carnivore. I need meat. And not for nothing, as they might say in my native Brooklyn, you know, not for nothing, Bernstein, but you're meat. So why don't you, you know, step aside and let me at the zebra. Nature stipulates the what is a value to any given organism, and you know, and what isn't. So values are always that which sustain life, and this is an important point. It leads us into another one, because when I was young, I used to think, you know, that maybe there's a distinction between psychological values and metaphysical values. You know, because Ayn Rand does say values are that which one acts to gain and or keep. So maybe, you know, drugs are a value to a drug addict, or loot to a bank robber, or prestige to some, you know, status seeker. Maybe those are values to them. They take action to gain the drugs or the loot, you know, or the prestige. But as I chewed, you know, studied more objectivism more deeply, you know, and thought about it more deeply, and discussed these issues with Leonard Peikoff and, you know, other objectivist philosophers, I realized no, that's not Rand's point. Values are that which sustain life. That which harms life is not a value. So drugs, you know, I'm not talking about like cocaine. I'm not talking about pharmaceuticals. So like so-called recreational drugs, you know, the highly toxic substances like cocaine is a perfect example, is not a value to a drug addict. It's life destroying. It's not life giving. So it's an anti-value. It's a disvalue. Regardless whether, no matter how much effort somebody puts into procuring it. I think, you know, Rand's point is objectively values sustain life. So if we want to, this this will lead us into the heart of this seminar, and that is the hands-on, applied, practical subject here. If we wanna gain what Aristotle long ago referred to as eudaimonia, that is flourishing life, then we have to make sure that our values are consistent, that they are congruent with human nature. That's the first thing we have to do. We have to make sure that our values are congruent with human nature, that they actually, given our nature as rational beings, that they actually sustain our lives. Because if I'm going to achieve this state of ecstatic joy that Rourke has, when he's when he sees the consummation of his baby, that his building has been erected exactly as he designed it, that if I think that's compatible with being an alcoholic, let's say, with drinking industrial strength quantities of vodka, or whatever, that's not going to happen. That stuff eats out your liver, it kills brain cells. You'd be hungover, drunk and/or hungover much of the time. There's some people. Ayn Rand herself was a heavy smoker, although in context that's understandable. She was born in 1905, right? It wasn't until 1950s or 1960s at the earliest that the research started to show that there was a causal connection between heavy cigarette smoking and heart or lung disease. But somebody today, with the knowledge we have, if they think that smoking a pack or more of cigarettes a day is going to enhance their life and/or be conducive towards this kind of joyous living, they're sadly mistaken. They are tragically mistaken. They are indulging in something that is a toxic substance, which is life-harming. So we need to make sure, the first thing we need to do to achieve this state is of ecstasy, of ecstatic living, is to make sure that our values are across the board are congruent with flourishing human life. That's the first thing. And then the second, of course, Ayn Rand's famous for. Well, actually, she's famous for both of these, right? Because the name of her philosophy, or the name she chose for her philosophy, is Objectivism. And there's two reasons for that. One is because concepts, she's claiming, are human concepts, or human ideas, are based in observational reality, in facts. And then two, values. That which we pursue in action, that values are grounded in observational reality, that values are factual. That of course is what the term objective means. It means oriented towards the object, referring to the object, grounded in facts. In contrast to subjective, which means oriented towards the values, desires, hopes, wishes, or beliefs of the subject, of the conscious agent. So objectivism, Ayn Rand chose the name of her philosophy for exactly that reason, that both concepts and values are objective. Now, the second point here, and the last of the theoretical points, is values are to be pursued and gained, never to be surrendered, never to be relinquished, never to be betrayed, never to be sacrificed. Of course, Ayn Rand famous for this also, for the virtue of selfishness. Of course, I have to say, conventionally, in our society, her understanding of what it means to be selfish is revolutionary, right? And Rand is very often attacked, or a straw man version of Rand is very often attacked, right, on this issue, that her enemies, both amongst the socialists and the religionists, or both, the religious socialists, her enemies often accuse her of meaning selfishness in the sense of victimizing or exploiting innocent others to get what you want. And that's absolutely not what Rand means by selfish. That's certainly not in anybody's self-interest to be an exploiter. what you do, if you're an exploiter of innocent others, is you make enemies of society's most honest members, and that's not in anybody's self-interest. What is in our self-interest, what is truly selfish, that is good for the self, is to hold rational values, that is those that are congruent with our nature, and then pursue, gain, fulfill those values, and never betray or sacrifice them for anything or anybody. So, I'm not a genius like Ayn Rand, but I can use myself as an example here. I know myself best, so I'm gonna use myself as an example. From the time I was a little kid, I wanted to be a writer. I never wanted to be anything else. Everything else is secondary. Well, this is a very good book. Is it Fountainhead? No. But this is a very good novel. Everything I know about literature tells me this is a very good novel. Very good novel. I'm very proud of it. So this is the 6th book I've published. I've got, I've written a bunch of booklets. I've published dozens of essays. I got more books in the pipeline, as Razi indicated. So I have been true to whatever my flaws or failings. A lot of them are going to be discussed tomorrow night when we discuss romantic love and relationships. But whatever my flaws or failings, I have been true in action to my highest value, and that is I am a writer. I didn't just say I was going to be a writer. I didn't just hope to be a writer. I am a writer. Values are to be pursued and gained, never to be surrendered. I'll give you a sad example of this. My poor mother was, she put the N in neurotic, capital N in neurotic for Jewish mother. But she had this. Her vision was. We're just pausing for food and everything, but her vision, she had 2 daughters, and then her youngest child, a son, me. And if you know anything about Jewish mothers, you know what they tend to be like with their sons. Well, mothers generally, but her vision was that her son was gonna grow up and live with her, spend his life with his mom, not go out with women, not get married, and just kind of be a mama's boy. And that wasn't going to happen. That just wasn't going to happen. I wasn't going to give up, as we're going to discuss tomorrow night, having a girlfriend, eventually marrying my girlfriend, having a romantic relationship was just too important. It would to me. That would have been an enormous sacrifice. And maybe there are some people who make that sacrifice, but I wasn't going to be one of them. And so, there's a good example in action of being selfish in the proper sense, because there was opposition to the value pursuit. There was opposition from a significant other in my life. My mother. It broke her heart when I got married and left home. But it was the right thing to do. It was the right thing, for me to do. And this is what selfishness looks like in action, under duress, against intense social opposition from an important person. Okay, so values then ought to be congruent with human nature and the survival requirements of mankind as a rational being, and they ought to be pursued and fulfilled, never sacrificed. They're objective. We have to be objective here, and we need to be egoistic. There's the 2 theoretical criteria. Now I think of this. I know the word intoxicated is problematic because the root of the term is toxic. You know, but I think of it as as being a value intoxicated person. As you could put it colloquially, you know, being high on life. You know, being high on values rather than on drugs. I remember some of my friends when I was a teenager in Brooklyn who were drug addicts, and they used to say, you know, reality is just for those who can't handle drugs. But you know, reality is only for those who can't handle drugs. But you know, that's you know, that's funny as a wisecrack, but it's also the polar opposite to the truth, and has led any number of people to an early grave. No, we want to be high. We want to be high on values. Now, let me get to the main part of this seminar, and that is that I know good people who I was lucky in a way, and that is, I don't know, maybe it's luck, maybe it isn't luck. I don't know, but I knew from the time I was a little kid what I wanted to do with my life. There was never any doubt in my mind. And the reason for that is I was always a hero worshiper. You know, that's why the book I'm working on now on the nature of heroism is also, it's like the fulfillment of my life's passion. You know, being a hero worshiper and then writing a theoretical book about the nature of heroes. You know, the heroes and hero worship. This is you know, perfect for me. But I was always a hero worshiper, and you know, especially fiction. You know, I read all these novels about heroes, or see these movies about heroes, but also nonfiction, and so to me, I couldn't imagine anything more exciting or more fulfilling than writing books about heroes. You know, so that was my reason for wanting to be a novelist. I can write books about heroes, or in nonfiction too. I can write about heroes. You know, so you know, in the Capitalist Manifesto, I think my most famous book, it's about the heroes of capitalism. You know, on both sides of the pond, in Britain and in the U.S. So I knew from what I wanted to do with my life from the time I was a little kid, you know, and what would fill it with passion and meaning. So, but not everybody does, which is not a moral failing. It's simple. It's not a moral failing, but it's a practical problem because we're trying to achieve as much, you know, joy in our life as possible, and if we don't know what we want to do with our life, and we don't have some, you know, preeminent value to fill it with, then it's going to cause our life to be deprived of joy and happiness. So the first thing for people who don't know what they want to do with their life is to find out what they want to do with their life. And how do you do that? How do you form we send the hitman out to silence the intruders. But the first question has to be, how do we form proper values? How do we know what we want? So remember, proper values must be in accordance with human nature and with mankind's survival instrument, survival requirements. So the one sense, I think, one sense in which we can properly be conformists is conform to reality. And even that's not really the meaning of the term conformist, or compliant, or congruent with reality. To hold reality-defying values is self-destructive. The drug addict, for example, is a perfect example, right? Our values must be congruent with reality. So you know what? Reality then sets the terms. Reality stipulates what is right for us, what is wrong with us in the broad sense, and we need to familiarize ourselves with reality in order to identify our proper values. And Leonard Peikoff put this point very nicely once in a lecture in New York when he said, reality is enormously fascinating to a rational person. So I love that formulation. Right? I mean, I love it. He said that off the cuff. He probably doesn't even remember this, but you know, I wrote it down. I think it's a great identification. Reality is enormously fascinating to a rational person. There's so many interesting things out there, you know, for you or I to fill our lives with. That very often the challenge would be not to find one thing, you know, that could fill my life with meaning, but to limit it, you know, to one or two things that might set my soul on fire. And that really resonated with me sitting in the audience as a 20-something-year-old kid, you know, listening to Dr. Peikoff lecture, because I was always a humanities guy, you know? And so for me, I mean, my bachelor's degree's in literature, my master's and PhD's in philosophy, but literature is my first love. Always has been, always will be. And so, you know, a career in that's why I want to write fiction and do. But I could have been very happy getting a PhD in literature and, you know, and you know, and lecturing on literature. Also, I'm fascinated by history. You know, the history of mankind, which is rather depressing field, to be perfectly honest with you, but it's so necessary to understand the present. I mean, for instance, these talking heads on TV is one example, and they talk about jihad or you know, or something. I don't know that they know the history. You know, going back to Muhammad's lifetime, that the one true faith must dominate the world. And you look at, let's put it this way. I think you can make a very strong case that Islam is the most successful imperialist system of history. I mean, amongst other things, it conquered, you know, the whole Middle East, the Far East, slaughtered maybe 80 million Hindus. In India, imposed the one true faith on millions and millions and millions of adherents, and to this day, 1,000 years later, will kill you for apostasy if you give up that faith. It's been an enormously successful imperialist philosophy and system, and from the Islamic standpoint, properly so. It's the one true faith. It should dominate the world. The talking heads don't seem to realize the history here. There's that, you know, jihad doesn't begin with Khomeini. You know, it begins with Muhammad. The history is fascinating, and it's absolutely necessary to understand the current world. So I could have been happy in any of those three fields: philosophy, literature, history. I can't study them all. I mean, I can, but you know, I can't devote my life to each one of them. I need, you know, 3 lifetimes. So the challenge here was to delimit. But nevertheless, there are still people who are searching for what they want out of life. You know, I remember when I was a kid in the 60s, there was one of the catchphrases of the 60s was, "I'm searching for my identity." That doesn't have much currency anymore, but some of you guys look like you might be old enough to remember, you know, the 60s. Okay, well then there's a way in which that makes sense, although not, I think, in the subjectivist way that the modernists hold it. But look, I think the valuing personality, and I'm leery of talking about the value intoxicated personality, immerses himself or herself in observational reality. Get out into the world and see the world. I mean that literally. Well, there's different ways to do this, but I want to break down this process into 5 steps. This immersing ourselves in reality. I want to break this process down into 5 steps in accordance with the objectivist epistemology. That is in accordance with the objectivist theory of knowledge. So we'll examine this process of immersing ourselves in observational reality. First at the perceptual level. That is at the level of observation. Second at the conceptual level, you know, at the level of thinking. Then at the evaluative level, you know, at the level of making appraisals and assessments, value judgments. Fourth, at the emotional level, what our emotional experience of the world is. And finally, at the action level, the most important of all. So, let's start, at the perceptual or observational level. I want to tell you a story about, true story. Oh, I'll change the names of the characters, but a true story about two kids growing up that I knew growing up in Brooklyn. One of these kids was named Ted, let's say. I'm just making this up. And he was very shy and introverted and fat and, was bullied and, and was picked on by these mean-spirited kids in school. And it just was extremely retiring and, struggled through school, but, graduated from high school and got a job, locally as a construction worker in Brooklyn, and, had his own apartment and, didn't get a car, although he was making money. Took the bus or the subway, to work and back, and never went anywhere. He didn't go out with women. He didn't go on vacation. Again, I don't think he's ever been on a plane to this day. There's a family member of mine. I don't think he's ever been on a plane to this day. It's not that bad of a thing, but and the amount of living that he. Let's put it this way, the amount of living that's somebody like that they permit themselves to do is narrowly circumscribed within the purview of whoever they happen to be born and raised. And that's it. And this happens to be Brooklyn or New York, so there's a lot of, when one tires of New York, one tires of life. Paraphrase. That's Rosie Ginsburg. That's not Samuel Johnson. But nevertheless, the amount of living that this kind of personality permits himself or herself to do is sadly delimited. It's narrowly circumscribed within the boundaries of whoever you happen to be raised. Now this other kid, this other guy I knew always wanted to go out and see the world, and it was fascinating. As soon as he graduated high school, he was working in high school, saving his money, and he left. Just leave it there. Like a few months after high school graduation, age 18, he left on an around the world adventure. I mean, this was like 3 years he was gone because he was working. He ended up in Kenya. I can't remember. He told me this was years ago. He ended up in Kenya, ran out of money, so he got a job. Doing this, that, the other thing. Made money, and then he kept and going around the world by all different means. By walking, by bicycle, backpacking, by bus. By camel, whatever it was. And after 3 years, he came home. It was great to see him. He had all his stories about his adventures. And he stayed in the New York area then for a couple of years. He worked, he made money, and then he was gone again. On another around the world trip, going to other places. So wow, we're talking about two polar opposite views of the world, and the amount of excitement or adventure that somebody that somebody might permit themselves. Now my poor mom was severely agoraphobic. You guys know what that is? They call it housewives disease sometimes. That she was terrified to leave the house. If you know the geography of Brooklyn at all, her boundary was like Ocean Parkway. She couldn't go or wouldn't go, further than that. So I grew up like my friend. I'll mention his name, Eric. My friend Eric. Wanting to see the world. I also wanted to get an education, so I didn't want to go. Take years to go on an around the world adventure. But we couldn't go anywhere, when I was a kid. Because my mom. In fact, I'll tell you. You want something sad? she died right before my 32nd birthday. And when she went into the hospital shortly before her death, that first night in the hospital was the first night she spent out of the home since the day I was born. So she hadn't spent a night out of the home in almost 32 years, which is sad. She lived in fear. So I grew up, reading all these books about explorers. I was reading about Magellan, and all these, Stanley and Livingston, all these great true stories about these explorers. Amundsen and Shackleton. This is Britain, so I gotta mention Shackleton. You guys know Ernest Shackleton, right? He's not just a hero. He's a legend. But anyhow, so I was reading all of these, all of these stories about explorers, and so not surprisingly, here's a Jewish kid from Brooklyn, went to college at a Catholic school in South Dakota. So I was going out and I was exploring in different ways, geographically, leaving the East Coast and going to the Midwest, exploring the Catholic school and Catholic culture, for a kid been raised in a different religion. So anyway, I think of this in my own mind. I think of this as actually, to segue into this, you guys remember a number of people here have read Atlas, right? Yeah. Francisco d'Anconia, everybody's favorite character in Atlas. Remember Francisco's childhood? His favorite expressions were, let's make it, or let's find out. You remember this? He led his buddies Dagny and Eddie on these various adventures, and they were one time they were in a junkyard, exploring the carcass of an old automobile, and one of Mrs. Taggart's friends, Dagny's mom's friends, who was a professor of literature, said to him, a young man of your breeding should be in the library studying the great works of the human mind. And Francisco responded, what do you think I'm doing? He was taking apart an internal combustion engine, Ayn Rand making a commentary there about culture is not just literature, music, and painting. It also includes engines and technology and scientific advance, all the works of the human mind. But Francisco led them off on adventures, and one of his childhood expressions was "Let's find out." Now that's an explorer's premise. Let's find out, and that's why I think of this as this approach. I think of this as the explorer's premise, and I think it's important to live on the explorer's premise, to have this sense of adventure, and that in part, at least in part, is very literally is to be taken very literally. The physical world, the physical nature, the world of observational reality. Let's get out and explore it. I mean, as we'll see in a few minutes, this is not necessary to find what you want to do with your life. But the more we live on the explorer's premise, the more we maximize the chance of finding the things and the persons and the activities that we really love. We don't have to be as crazy as people like Magellan or Shackleton. Just their courage is off the charts. We don't, and it borders on maybe suicidal insanity. Magellan in particular. I mean, you guys know the story? I mean, it's 1519. They called them ships. These ships these guys sailed in would be like rowboats. You'd be like lifeboats on an ocean liner today with sails. They got to go circumnavigate the globe, and that's not even the worst of the problem. That's the least of the problem. That these boats are not built to cross the ocean by our standards. No. The worst of the problem is several points. They didn't have the slightest idea where the bleep they were going. You know, once they got around, well, they didn't go around Cape Horn. The Magellan got them through the Straits of Magellan, which is an extraordinary navigational achievement even today. But once they got into the Pacific, they had no idea where they were. They thought Japan was like, what was it? Like they thought their estimate was Japan was like 500 miles from Mexico. Yeah, no, bro, that's not accurate. They had no charts, no maps, no knowledge, and no contact with land. And I remember thinking, because I'm writing about this in my book on my self-help book, Life Lessons from Mankind's Greatest Heroes, because I think Magellan is one of mankind's greatest heroes. I comparing and contrasting this with Apollo 13. Now, I'm old enough to remember Apollo 13 in April of 1970. You guys might have seen that the Ron Howard's great film on this. You guys have seen Apollo 13 with Tom Hanks as Jim Lovell? I remember Apollo 13 is approaching the moon. There's an explosion on the spacecraft. Man, I hate it when that happens. And Jim Lovell, the commission commander, he's so freaking calm. It's what I always remembered about the space program. And I used to go back to the Mercury program. I used to pretend I was sick so I could say my mother wasn't fooled, but we used to battle this. I want to stay home and watch. These guys are going into space, man. I mean, this is fantastically exciting. School's boring to freaking start with, and I'm gonna go to school and be bored to death and miss the launch of these manned space missions. The Mercury program, and the Gemini, and then of course culminating in the Apollo program and landing on the moon. No, it was fascinating, and I was so impressed by how calm the astronauts were. They were all combat fighter pilots. 1961, 62, when the first Mercury missions were launched. I mean, these guys were World War II vets. They'd been fighting German and Japanese, pilots and fighting, and fighting for their lives. So these guys were, and they were brilliantly trained engineers. And these guys were so calm. So what year was it? 1970. Apollo 13 explodes as it approaches the moon, and Jim Lovell's famous line. I heard it on TV. I was watching. Houston, we've had a problem. That's exactly how he said it. Like he's sitting in his living room with his wife, and the TV goes on the fritz. And he said, Mabel, we have a problem. That was so amazing to me, all the more so because my poor mom was so nervous all the time. She used to freak out. She couldn't handle it. My friend showed up at dinner time. She had a fit. She couldn't handle it. This guy says the spacecraft just exploded as it approached the moon. Houston, we've had a problem. Magellan wasn't that well off. He had nobody to contact. He said, the ship starts to sink in a gale. He can't get on a satellite phone and say, Madrid, we've had a problem. No. Well, once we're out of sight of land, you're alone. So I have tremendous admiration for the astronauts, tremendous admiration for what they did, but they had this amazing support network. They had the technology to talk to a mission control at Houston, and they had some of the greatest technologists in the world working for NASA to help them solve these problems. Magellan didn't have shit. He had nothing. He's simply on his own. So I mean, just the balls of it. Yeah, we're going to circumnavigate the globe. In 1519. I mean, that would be amazing to do it today, when you had, especially if you use it on one of them boats of that size. But today when you have, charts and maps, and you have satellite phones, and you're in touch with the weather, with the weather station, in touch with the Coast Guard, that would be an enormously dangerous undertaking today. Never mind 1519, Well, Magellan, of course, was killed in the Philippines, but some of his crew members actually survived and circumnavigated the globe. Anyways, it's just extraordinary. Now, I don't say that for us to live, we have to have this kind of courage. This is courage that maybe doesn't border on the foolhardy. It's probably 1,500 miles over the border. This is a suicidal insanity. but it's ballsy, man. It is courageous. You know, go out. This is how human beings expand their knowledge. You think about it. Circumnavigate the globe. Nobody from Europe in the Western world had ever been in the, across the Pacific, and nobody in Asia had crossed the Atlantic. There was no knowledge. Anyway, you get the idea. But in principle, I think part of the way to be an impassioned valuer is to live on the explorer's premise, to realize that observational reality, physical nature is fantastically interesting. I mean, it's just amazing, the ocean and the mountains, and just there's just so much to see, and witness, and just live. Go hiking in the hills, or surfing in the ocean, or just now, like I said, I'm emphasizing this. I don't think this is literally necessary to find what you want to do with your life. For example, you guys know who Emily Dickinson was? He's just sadly lacking in literary.
Oh yeah, author, yes, author, yeah.
Yeah, poet. One of the great poets.
American poet.
Yeah. Considered probably the greatest poetess since Sappho. That is in 2,000 years. 19th century American literature. Emily Dickinson is a brilliant poet. I strongly recommend you. I love some of her poems. I'm trying to remember how it goes, but it'll come to me. Victory is counted sweetest by those who ne'er succeed. To contemplate a nectar requires direst need. I don't remember the rest of it. She's just a beautiful poet. Anyhow, she was known as the Belle of Amherst. Much of her life, Emily Dickinson was a recluse. She lived in she was a little eccentric. She was reclusive. She lived in this house in Amherst, Massachusetts. She had a small circle of friends. Probably was in love a few times in her life, but there's no evidence that she ever had a romantic relationship with any of the guys that she was probably in love with. But yet she wrote some of the most exquisite poetry, and presumably, I'm hoping anyway, and guessing that this filled her life with meaning. That let's put it this way: you don't attain that level of artistry as when you see in her poetry without one, genius, two, passion for this field, and then three, an enormous amount of work. I mean, you go over it. Ayn Rand said she wrote every page of Atlas Shrugged at least 5 times. That's at least 5,000 pages. That's how you get that level of artistry. Well, I mean, Emily Dickinson, you could see how many times she must have worked and reworked and edited and re-edited this. That's how you get to that level. So the passion she must have had for this to motivate the amount of work it takes to reach that level. No matter how much of a genius you are, nobody gets to that level without a great deal of hard work. Remember Edison's famous definition of genius? 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. Yeah, well, you gotta have the 1% inspiration for sure, but you also gotta be willing to put in the 99% perspiration. So Emily Dickinson rarely left, Amherst, Massachusetts. So I mean, I think there's a lesson there, and that is we don't have to go explore the world. We don't have to literally be on the explorer's premise like Magellan to find what we love in life. We can find it in our own backyard, literally. Because in our own backyard, presumably, there were human beings in a small town, let's say, never mind London, but a small town somewhere. There are human beings. There's probably a school. There's probably a library. There's all kinds of there's people to meet. Wisdom, I always thought of, I mean, I'm a philosopher, right? You guys know what the word philosophy means, don't you? You guys don't know much, huh?
Lover of wisdom.
Thank you.
We know literally what it means, yes. Friends of wisdom. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Well, Telly's Greek, he knows
Yeah,
that.
sure.
But the English translation from the Greek is, philosophy is love of wisdom. And I always thought it was a beautiful, beautiful phrase and thought that we're lovers of Sophia, we're lovers of wisdom. It's a beautiful name for all you parents or future parents to name your daughter, Sophia, because it literally means wisdom. My daughter Penelope, another Greek name from the Odyssey, but I love that name. And but Regina and I, my ex-wife and I, the other name we seriously considered was Sophia. But anyhow, I always thought wisdom resides in a deep and abiding understanding of human nature, human beings, human life, and that takes experience. Notice there are prodigies in certain fields, mathematics, let's say. Somebody is a very young child or as a teenager can do extraordinarily advanced work in mathematics, very abstract. It doesn't require a great deal of life experience. It doesn't require getting to know human beings. But notice that nobody, and did I say nobody, has ever written a great novel at that tender age. Nobody. In their teens, or even in their 20s. I mean, Tolstoy at age 15 might have been more intelligent than he was at age 50, because being a Russian, he was a heavy drinker, and the vodka may well have killed a lot of his brain cells by the time he was 50. But at age 15, he could not possibly have had sufficient life experience to write War and Peace. It's not possible. Wisdom requires a great deal of intelligence. It requires a great deal of life experience, and then a great deal of reflection. Intelligent, critical reflection upon life experience. So it's really fascinating, isn't it? You see these prodigies in certain fields, but there's never been one in literature. I don't think there ever will be. I wouldn't say definitively there never will be, although I suspect that's true, simply because I'm the last guy to want to put limits on the human potential. Who knows, what some prodigy might do. I doubt it though. I just think much more life experience is necessary to gain the kind of knowledge of human beings it takes to develop characters at the level of an Ayn Rand or a Tolstoy or a Shakespeare or somebody, Dostoevsky or somebody at that level. But anyhow, the world of books is also, like Emily Dickinson, the world of books is also to be explored. It's a different type of exploration than Magellan, but I do think, I want to be very exact here. First of all, I think the explorer's premise takes different forms. I think there's the world of books, there's the world of observational reality, the world of, that is the world of physical nature, and third, today, there's the internet. There's a whole nother world here for us in our day. So there's different permutations here on exploration, and I do think somebody who wants to be an impassioned valuer, I do think it's outstanding to explore all three of those worlds. And I do think the more exploration we do, I think the better our chances of finding the things, the objects, the persons, and the activities that will fill our lives with meaning. So there's Magellan as the prototypical, a paradigm example of exploring physical nature. I think before I get to the online world, the world of books, Emily Dickinson's a great example. Literary genius who did very little physical exploration. Rarely left Amherst, Massachusetts. But since literature is my first love, let me give you an example from a literature textbook from when I was in college, and the English lit, and the author of the textbook. I generally think textbooks are so boring that they should be marketed as a cure for insomnia, but every now and then I come across a textbook that I think has high quality, and this literature, this text in English lit was one of those examples, and I think the professor who wrote it, he was comparing and contrasting the two greatest poets in English literature, William Shakespeare and John Milton. And Shakespeare, of course, had little formal schooling, which is why there's this whole cottage industry of professors at Princeton or wherever, these guys who consider themselves elite because they're professors, at Harvard or Oxford or Princeton. Say, well, Shakespeare couldn't have written these plays. It's not possible. He just didn't have the schooling, necessary for it. Now Shakespeare did have a very, very outstanding grammar scoring, the way he went. But nevertheless, Shakespeare came down to London, as a young man, and he lived in the world of theater. Now you guys probably know this is London. You probably know something about theater arts, and the kind of colorful personalities that populate the theater. So to put it generously, kind of often just freaking crazy, boozing, drug addicted. The people I've known in theater arts in New York. Oh, jeez, I imagine it was even more so in Shakespeare's day during the Roaring Elizabethan era. But anyway, it's filled. The good news is, however crazy some of these people are, and Shakespeare's contemporary Christopher Marlowe, another literary genius, died at age 29. Right, he was stabbed to death in some tavern under circumstances that nobody to this day understands. But they know Marlowe was a heavy drinker and skirt chaser, and just his vices were he was as much a genius of low living as he was a genius of literature, and because that led to him being murdered violently and killed violently. But Shakespeare lived that world. He knew human beings. He immersed himself in London. In the London theater, you could see in all of his best plays, his characterizations are extraordinary. And whether it's Macbeth or Hamlet or Romeo and Juliet or Lear, Shakespeare knew people. He didn't need a lot of schooling for that. His school was the London theater, was London and the London theater world. When you tire of London, you tire of life, Samuel Johnson said 200 years later, and he's like, exactly right. Now, Milton, on the other hand, also an extraordinary poet. You read the poetry of these two, and I don't know who was the more consummate master of the English language between the two of them. Maybe it's a tie. But Milton, of course, was semi-blind, and he after his schooling, he retired to his family's farm in the rural area and devoted his life to study. And Milton was a master of how many languages? Like he was fluent in like 8 languages, including languages that were dead languages, Hebrew and ancient Greek. And Milton was fluent, in all of them. I mean, he was an incredible scholar. And anyway, the writer of the textbook put it very nicely when he said, Milton's mind ranged over the world of books the way Shakespeare's mind ranged over the world of men. Ooh, I mean, that's just perfect. That's perfect, So Shakespeare, in effect, exploring London and the London theater world, and Milton exploring the world of books. And both of them were geniuses, obviously, but the point for us is, I think this, to compose the literary works they did required passion for what they were doing, a love of literature, a love of the field that they chose. And so they must have lived, with this kind of passion that we're talking about. Now I've known for a long time. I don't have the genius of a Shakespeare or Milton, but I'm not a dolt either. And so the question that I raised to myself, this was even before I gave this talk the first time, even before the internet. I think it was the early '90s, before the internet became popular. It was before Al Gore had invented it. But that's a joke in the U.S. that Al Gore said he invented the internet at one point. But my question is, well, why can't our minds range over both? We don't need to be a genius to explore the physical world and to explore the world of books and to gain awareness of how many different kinds of things are possible, to us in the world. How many different, the objects, the activities, the persons, that might fill our life with meaning. So
maybe not everybody, but us in the West, yeah, definitely. No, a kid in Tibet, yeah, maybe it doesn't have the chances that we have.
Well, they probably have Wi-Fi, an internet hookup in Tibet now.
All right, so they can explore it on the internet, not physically like we can.
Well, yeah, Tibet. Yeah, I get your point. I get your point.
I think in Africa, I don't know, in a village, hut village, Masai Mara, doesn't have the abilities we have in the West.
Well, yeah, right. We have advantages without a doubt, but again, we don't want to put limits on the human potential. I mean, some kid in in Sudan. No, I'm thinking of Sudan because for decades the jihadist regime in Khartoum was enslaving and slaughtering the black population in southern Sudan. Some black kid and who knows, what kind of.
Amos from Sudan. That's a good example.
Yes, I know, but some black kid in Sudan, who knows what kind of courage and will the kid had to escape from the slave drivers and go on to do God knows what with his life. Human potential. You're absolutely right that living in the capitalist, industrialized, advanced nations of the West gives us enormous advantages. But the human potential remains the human potential. The things people have done to escape from totalitarian states, for example. In the '80s, Disney Studios made that film, Night Crossing. Anybody seen Night Crossing? It didn't get big, it wasn't famous, but you can probably find it somewhere. I recommend it. It's a true story about this family. Was in I don't remember whether it was Czechoslovakia or whether it was East Germany. I don't remember what country it was. But this guy had the idea he was going to use a hot air balloon, and he was going to fly over the Iron Curtain and land in the West. And anyway, I won't tell you how the story turns out if you want to watch it. But I mean, this is a guy who's on the explorer's premise. I mean, he's going to escape from a totalitarian state. In a hot air balloon. That's pretty. That's courageous. Anyhow, the explorer's premise, I think, is the first point I want to stress here. And again, today I think there's a third way to explore the world, to be on that premise, and that is on the internet. Now I gotta confess, my technological skills are limited at best. So I'm not a proficient geek, and I need to get better at this, because there's stuff on the internet. You notice if you read my books or essays, you look at all the citations. It was like my essay on climate change, last year, there was like 78, references in the endnotes, and there's probably like 60 of them are books, hard copy books, and maybe 15 or 20, websites. So I'm still, I'm a dinosaur, I'm still, more comfortable with books than but I keep Amazon alive, in business, get all these books from Amazon. But, there's stuff on this, and books are probably still a better source of knowledge than websites are. But the websites are becoming more and more proficient and more reliable. So I need to become more proficient in that world and explore that world better myself. The younger generation usually that world they're comfortable in. They're comfortable exploring, online. Get out into physical nature. They may, physically they're usually pretty good. The kids, they get out into the world, maybe do some exploring. It's the world of books that I think like to kick them in the rear end a little bit, and read, do a little more reading. But I think all three of these venues or formats are outstanding ways of exploring and looking for, very self-consciously looking for the things, the objects, persons, and/or activities that will fill our lives with meaning, or fill our lives with even more meaning. So that's the explorer's premise. That's I think the nature of the valuing personality at the observational level. Should we do a few questions before we?
Yeah.
To take. You can get some food, Razi?
Yeah. What did you want to order?
It was I was eat pub food, but it was the chicken.
Chicken with lemon.
No lemon.
I thought Rita has that all the time. It looks good.
I don't like
Look
lemon.
at the
Thank you, Elaine. I don't like lemon. Where is it? Chicken and mushroom pie.
All right. Pie.
Yeah, we gotta have pie and mash, man. We're
Yes,
in
yes, we're in
London,
yes.
London pub.
Correct.
Having anything but pie and mash, that'd be like going to Nathan's at Corner Island, not having hot dogs. I mean, it's like gotta be a freaking communist,
Yeah.
Thank you. Any questions on the?
I mean, what you were saying, it just reminded me, I think it was Socrates who said it, the unexamined life is not worth living.
Yes.
So how does that ties up to what you said? Because that's a pretty, pretty harsh thing to say, it's not worth living. Just thinking of your mom.
Chicken and mushroom pie.
Thinking of the story you
With
told.
mash.
And mash, yes. Like in the cover. Yeah,
Right.
thinking about the story you told with your mom or that Ted guy, the construction worker, was their life not worth living because they didn't examine it?
It's not the same thing, right? Not the same point.
Eamon, you want to comment on
Yeah,
that?
you want to answer?
So your point is it's increasing the possibility that you're gonna find the things and people and activities that you're gonna love
Right.
doing.
Right.
And Socrates' point is that
You have to do it.
you have to do it or your life is not gonna be worth living.
Isn't Ayn Rand's point of view, the happiness, the standard of life is, the standard is life and it's all about happiness, and so how are you going to find that happiness? If that Ted guy with the construction job somehow found happiness, fine.
Yeah. Right.
But did he? Did your mom found happiness?
You gotta be honest as I can. You're looking at somebody's life from the outside, so you don't know.
You don't know what they're
You don't
thinking.
know what or thinking or feeling, but you can make pretty accurate inferences. My guess, educated guess, would be no and no.
What about the other
those
thing
two
then,
cases.
the other big saying, ignorance is a bliss. No books, no explorers, branches, no nothing. Well, bliss.
Wait, hold on a second. Let's do one at a time. The unexamined life is not worth living. It reminds me, that taken literally, that would be a little bit harsh.
Yeah,
You're right.
that's what I thought.
But Socrates was not generally, a harsh person. Reminds me of 2,000 years later, John Stuart Mill, the British philosopher, said famously that it was better to be a discontented Socrates than a contented pig, and I think that's really captures Socrates' meaning, that as human beings, if we don't reflect on our life and critically examine it, then we're attempting to live as though we were one of the higher animals. It's not a human life. I think is what Socrates is saying. I think that the great Greek philosophers, Aristotle, to me, who's the greatest of the philosophers, Aristotle's point is that, he talks about eudaimonia, which for a long time was translated into English as happiness, but Aristotle's scholarship has come a long way in the English-speaking world, in England, on both sides of the pond, in the last 100 years or so. And the Aristotle scholars today assure us that what Aristotle means by eudaimonia is flourishing, flourishing life. Aristotle was adamant that that's impossible for a human being in the absence of intellectual interest. That is, we're the rational animal. We have to use our minds. If we don't use our minds, it's like a bird not using its wings. We're not going to self-actualize. We're not going to self-fulfill in accordance with our nature. So I think that's what Socrates means.
And you know that Samuel Johnson quote you said a couple of times here.
Yeah.
If you read the whole thing, he says the intellectual man is tired of London. It's the word intellectual. Everybody keeps missing it out, but if you read the whole thing, what he said, it's the intellectual. So because when I say it, someone will say, "Oh, what? I prefer to be on a beach, lie on a beach all day and surf." Well, yes, sorry, I need to add. He said it's the intellectual is tired of London. Yes, if you are like that, you're not gonna love London. But if you're an intellectual, this is the place.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I like the quiet of the countryside. I live in a quiet town, but truthfully, the big cities are where the culture, cultural centers. Absolutely. London, Paris, New York, places like that.
So what about the other saying, that ignorance is a bliss?
Yeah. It's funny you should mention that, Telly, because I used to play basketball in the park, Marine Park in Brooklyn. All these drug addicts, and criminals, and stuff. And I remember there was junior high school there, and the janitor in the junior high school, big dude, he was like 6'4", 6'5", big guy. They called him Moose. And Moose would come out, and play basketball with us sometimes. And I'll never forget him. Somebody, I don't even remember the context anymore, but somebody said, ignorance is bliss about somebody. Right? And Moose, who I don't know if he graduated high school, I'm not sure. But I remember Moose, maybe in his 40s, had a lot more life experience than us. Moose said something very profound. He said, he said to us, because he wanted us to go to college. And Moose said, ignorance is not bliss, he said. Ignorance is only ignorance. And you take wisdom where you find it, right? I mean, that's wise. Ignorance is not bliss. Ignorance is only ignorance.
But the saying, it's a popular saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Saying, all these books, don't bother your mind with books, just forget about it, be happy, it's a thing, lots of people go by it. Yeah,
well, a lot of people go by all kinds of things. Doesn't mean it doesn't do any good. Did you want?
Muhammad and Ayn, or were you first?
How old were you when you married?
20. When I married the first time?
Yeah,
I was 28.
Right, so you managed to leave home 4 years before your mom died.
Right.
Yeah.
So what did she say?
She said, if you marry that girl, I'm gonna die.
But she waited 4 years.
Well, she wasted away. It was really sad. Her life was tied up in being a mom to her son. And when I grew up and left the nest, I think she just lost the meaning in her life. It was really sad.
So is there a value in what she was doing when she was preventing you from marrying? Value to her?
No, I think it was self-destructive. I mean, it was hurtful. It was harmful to me. I think it was harmful to her.
But to her, she wouldn't feel it was harmful.
Well, she felt it was harmful when I left.
Yeah.
I've seen better mothers since, because I'm a lot older now, with their sons in the same situation, and encouraging their son to. My old girlfriend Lisa was really good on this with her son. her son Aaron. She encouraged him when he was, in his late teens to have a girlfriend. She liked his girlfriend. She welcomed his girlfriend into the house, and it was much more rational. She was an objectivist. It was much more rational and healthy because it recognized, my child's going to grow up. My boy's going to become a man. What's right for him is to, spread his wings and fly, and I want to, be there, and support that. And, my mother wasn't just fighting against me. She was fighting against nature. It's not right to try to indoctrinate your kid to stay home, and live at home with mom. We should be training our children to think for themselves and act on their thinking and go out into the world. My daughter's 15, and at some point, she's very close now. This summer, we spent a lot of time at the beach since she was 9 years old, and she was old enough to take her into the surf at Jones Beach. She's 15. Maybe this summer she's gonna be too cool to want to hang out with Dad now. Or certainly by next year when she's 16. So it's gonna be a big adjustment for me. It's gonna be sad. My beach buddy's not gonna. She have a boyfriend. Her friend she'll be driving, have her own car and everything. Yes, but I have to not only accept that, I need to encourage it. I need to encourage it. What's right and proper for Penny is to, spread her wings and fly. And I think parents we need to encourage that, and then take happiness.
Did the same happen to your sisters, older sisters?
Well, as a Jewish mother, my mom's mentality was you marry off your daughters and you cling to your son.
Right.
So that was her mentality. So
Does she want you to be adopted?
Yes. But my oldest sister has her own grievances against her for that. She said to me all the time, "Mom, I didn't care who I married, as long as as long as I married, as long as I was married, anyhow, that's not healthy, rational parenting. And we can learn to be better parents, by negative inspiration from our parents, not just by positive inspiration. I'm not gonna raise my kid, not gonna parent my kid the way I was parented. But the ignorance is bliss thing is. I saw a bumper sticker once, that was great. It said, "You think education is expensive? Try ignorance."
Yeah.
Which is true. Which is true.
Eamon has a question.
Eamon always has questions.
Well, actually, a comment. But I mean, you kind of answered the ignorance and bliss thing. But
Well, just maybe one last point on it. Again, the Aristotelian objectivist point is man is the rational animal. We need an education. We need to develop our mind. It's fundamental to our nature. And that doesn't necessarily mean schooling. Schooling and education aren't the same thing. Remember Mark Twain's great line that he said, "I never let my schooling interfere with my education."
Yeah. Especially nowadays. Yeah.
But we all need an education, whether by thinking, by reading, by finding knowledgeable people to mentor us, by thinking and reading. Hopefully schooling enhances our education, but that's not always the case. So, but ignorance is not bliss. I think knowledge is power. I quote Francis Bacon.
So yeah, I mean, I always thought, because I think it's important to evaluate a saying like ignorance is bliss. I always thought that it came from a place where someone thought if you were to be intellectual, it's good to be intellectual, good to have knowledge, but it's necessarily going to end up with you being depressed, because they don't, if someone's happy, they think the stupid person is happy and the intelligent person should be actually depressed and sad because the world is crazy and
Which is true.
Yeah. So that's their reaction. It's like a cynical thing.
Yeah, you're right.
Maybe it's to show that the reason I'm so depressed is because I'm so intellectual and so intelligent. I know so much, and it's better for you to just be ignorant so you can be happy. So
Well, I don't want to offend Elaine, but that's very French, isn't it? the 20th century. I don't know about, probably not 19th century. You know, the great French romantics. Ayn Rand, of course, thought that Hugo was the greatest novelist in world literature, and I gotta agree, Hugo's a magnificent novelist. Hugo never gave me the impression, you know, Hugo, Dumas, Rostand, any of the great French romantics never gave me, you know, but post World War I, Western culture, France, Germany, the existentialists, Heidegger, Sartre, you know, Camus. I think you know, and then the deconstructionists, you know, Foucault, Derrida. I think that is the mentality. You know, that the sign of intellect is depression. Ennui, right? Ennui.
Boredom.
Yeah, and just boredom at some. Well, I mean, Sartre wrote a famous novel, right? Nausea. You know, that some, not just with socially, but metaphysically, the fact that the main character. How do you pronounce the name? Roquentin? I don't know the you know the main character in Nausea.
No.
Is it, I don't know how to pronounce it. It's Roquentin. Is it Roquentin? I know I like 3 words in French. But anyhow, he's nauseated by the fact of his own existence. You know, that metaphysical reality is the very fact that there is sickening. You know, so there's a very deep level of metaphysical angst. You know, I'm sorry. You.
So I'll go back to what you said initially about values. So values that are objective.
Mm-hmm.
And if there are values that are objective, each one of us has some values that are very different. So for someone, maybe value to pursue literature.
Right.
For someone, maybe engineering. But I cannot say that, okay, it's right for you to pursue engineering, so I cannot judge it. So if I cannot judge it, how can we tell that that is objective? It's objective for whom?
That's
and if you could expand a little bit on, there are some values that I think are values for everyone. Okay? The job, or honesty, or productiveness, but there may be some secondary values that are maybe a value for you and may not be for someone else. And
Yeah.
then how can I say that that is objective if it is a value for me and not for you? I mean,
right. Well, no, I think that's a really good question, and I think Rand's point is, in the broad sense, values, in the broad philosophical sense, values are objective, but there's an enormous amount of optionality there. So, for instance, given human nature, productive career is a value. We need to be productive. You could put it, the reason for it, you can put it in negative terms. We don't live in the Garden of Eden. You know, we need to grow food. We need to build houses. We need to cure diseases. We need to be productive. So some kind of productive career is a value for a human being. But as what? You know, butcher, baker, candlestick maker. There's a million different options in productive career. Now notice that non-productivity or parasitism is out. You know, if I want to be a drug dealer or a hitman for the mob or something, you know, that you know, that's, you know, causing that's being destructive, not constructive. That's out. But within these broad parameters, you know, I think romantic love is another, you know, objective value for human beings. But with whom? You know, there's 7 billion people in the world. So there's a great deal of optionalities. And I think here's where we can really exercise our selfishness. You know, there's this broad range of possibilities in productive career or in romantic love or in close friendship. There's this. Hi, Laura. My mash looks good.
Enjoy your meal.
Oh, I sure will, Laura. Thank you.
Cheers.
There's you know, there's this broad range of options, and here's where we can be gleefully, joyously selfish. You know, so for me, you know, like literature, well, that's a productive career. Teaching, you know, writing, lecturing, and now I could throw myself into it joyously because this is what I love, you know. So I think Rand's point is values in that sense are both objective and optional.
Right. After the break.
Okay.
Yeah, so Andrew can eat something.
Yes,
Everybody wants something?
and we'll
Ask